Warhammer 40k is a universe where even hope needs power armor. Now imagine the master of magnetism crash-landing into this grimdark galaxy, a man who commands every bolt, bullet, and battleship hull with a flick of his fingers. Is Magneto a heretic, a Xenos warlord, or the only shield mutants ever get in a cosmos that grinds the weak into dust? Today, we ask one savage question. What if Magneto landed in Warhammer 40k? The sky over the Forge world was a perpetual bruise, a pall of ash and chem fog ripped by the red stitches of orbital traffic. For generations, the clouds had tasted like iron filings and incense. The populace had forgotten what real thunder sounded like until a new kind tore the heavens. Vox towers screamed warnings in Binharik, and auger screens bloomed with impossible readings as a fireball clawed through the atmosphere, shedding molten skin in flakes that fell smoking onto manufactoria roofs. Work gangs stared up with goggles lit by reflected flame. In the factor arches, servo cherubs scented the air and giggled static prayers. Someone whispered, "A meteor." Someone else whispered, "An omen." Above them all, the crater wrote itself into the planet like the point of a burning quill. It struck between a rail yard and a cradle of rusted cranes, carving through slag hills and coolant streams, turning pipework into flayed vines that thrashed in their own heat. The shockwave lifted a forest of antennae, flattened 100 habs, and made the cathedral spires ring like struck bells. Then the sound withdrew, sucked inward as though the world drew breath to speak. The crater's rim shivered and collapsed in sheets. Steam met ash and became a grey rain. Out on the perimeter, picked captures stuttered and died. A dozen servitors stood, then fell in synchrony as their internal compasses spun nonsense. He rose from the center with leisurely certainty, a figure suspended in a sphere of dust and hot metallic grit, cloak dragging in a wind that obeyed him before physics. A lattice of bent rails and rebar hung around him like a crown. He took stock of gravity, of pressure, of the magnetic whispers that threaded everything here. The planet was a symphony, tramways humming, shipyard gantries thrumming, rivet guns tapping out staccato prayers. In that symphony, the man was both conductor and storm. The first responders were Skitarii from the nearest macroclade, their footfalls ticking in perfect cadence, their oculars cold lamps behind iron veils. They deployed into firing lines between half-melted cargo haulers, chant synthesizers rasping litanies against abominable intelligence. "Identify," ordered a Vox augur, whose voice had been run through more filters than a hive's air. "Kneel and surrender." "By decree of the Fabricator General," then the command was gone, snipped in mid-air as the man inclined one gloved hand. Guns lifted from their owners. Bolts and clamps unscrewed themselves with dreamlike patience. Galvanic rifles unmade their cylinders and unspooled like ribbon candy, wires peeling out and drifting, each strand turning inside the unseen gyre that his will described. The Skitarii did not panic. They were built not to. They shifted targets to bodies, to knees, to eyes. But the aim correction servos in their augmetics shuddered and hardened in permanent right angles. To the outside observer, it looked as if an invisible sculptor had decided their joints were too fluid and fixed them as sculpture should be. A walker's tread screamed, then coiled into a snake that strangled its own chassis. He descended until his boots brushed slag that had not yet decided whether it was rock or glow. The ground tried to hold him and failed because every ferrous vein underfoot was an ally waiting for instruction. He touched down because he chose to. When he spoke, the sound carried, not with the machine resonance of the priests, but with simple human authority. "I am not your enemy," he said, and every metallic facet around them leaned to listen. "Enemy registered," said a Skitarii Alpha, whose command cortex could not translate nuance. "Unknown psycho pattern. Escalation authorized. With disciplined efficiency, they reached for fallback weapons and prayer beads tied to knives. The man's head tilted, his helm reflecting back a panorama of red robes and gunmetal. The prayer beads lifted first, then the knives, then belt buckles, canteen caps. A small universe of scraps. The knives aligned, noses kissing, into a triangle around the Alpha's throat. The beads formed a halo that clicked and clicked like a rosary, appraising a soul. Further back, a tech priest Dominus arrived, borne on a carriage of spidered limbs, his spine a phone mast of pennants and sensor rods. The Dominus's mouth parts unfurled like a metallic flower, and he sang the litany of unmaking at this intrusion, syllables old as Martian dust. Oxidized incense coils burned. Mechanicum seals boiled on his robes where molten hail had splashed. His cogitators tried to measure the field and came away with contradictory infinities. Unclean vector. Sorcerous wave. Heretic. His mechatendrils coughed up a phosphor serpenta and fired. The man lifted 2 fingers and the bolt went sideways in a gentle curve and returned, nuzzling into the ground at the Dominus's feet, where it cooled and died like a chastised hound. "I am not your enemy," the stranger repeated, pivoting to take in the kilns, the crane bones, the thick pyrex veins of the manufactoria. "But I will not kneel." He tasted up through the infrastructure. Cable races, feeder lines, rail spines buried like arteries. A continent away, a shipyard plucked at the magnetosphere with its lift coils. He felt that tug. Above, a ring of maintenance satellites curled like fish around a planet-sized anvil. He felt those scales. More locally, he felt 1,000 people under concrete shells, warm iron in their blood, crude metal in their tools, the thin rings and old coins that marked their brief joys. He felt others too, those set apart by twist of birth, men and women with extra ribs and third eyes and cartilage horns and too many fingers. He recognized them as a lighthouse recognizes another's beam. They would hear of this. They would come. Someone in the watching crowds tried to run. A labor overseer struck him with a shock baton and pointed at the man in the crater. "Stay," he barked, as if the command applied to physics. The man's gaze flicked, and the baton sprang from the overseer's hand and hung point down inches from the meat of his own palm. It began to hum, a warning that the next disobedience would be measured in burns. The crowd stilled. They were used to gods peering down from stained glass and not looking back. This god's eyes swept them and weighed them. The Adeptus Arbites arrived with armor still kissed by ash. They made order from panic, because that was their catechism. A judge trudged forward under the weight of a gold aquila. He presented a rosette embossed with enameled fire. "By the Lex Imperialis," he began, and didn't get further. Not because the man silenced him, but because 3 servitors trundled up, their data tongues screeching a new priority sigil. Some cog in the judicial engine had already chewed the augur data and tossed out a single word: Inquisitor. From a prowler painted the black of twice-burned oil, a woman walked out with a hat banded in gold wire and a rosette that ate the light around it. A small retinue followed, a penitent with a censer fused to his wrist, a scribe who wrote with both hands and a mouth quill, a gun servitor whose barrel more resembled a small organ pipe. The Inquisitor did not raise her voice. "You are a psyker," she said, "not a question. Or something worse. You burn those you do not understand," he said. He looked up past her to where a crane had mid-swing frozen, cables groaning. He exhaled, and the crane gently set down its load as if a giant hand had guided it. "You have built a galaxy of chains and called it safety." "We have built a galaxy that survives," she said. "Name and origin." He considered the utility of names here. In the air around him, the microscopic dust of iron clung to the fields he shaped. He drew a small figure with it, an atom symbol children might sketch in a school that no longer existed. "Eric," he said after a moment, "I come from a place that is not your place. I come from a people you would call mutants." The word hung. A glyph burned into the night. It cracked something. In the crowd, the backs of certain necks prickled. In a window above, a child with webbed fingers felt the bones in his hands vibrate like tuning forks. Somewhere in the underhive, a woman with scales along her throat paused in her work and swore she heard chains fall onto stone. The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed. "Mutants," she repeated carefully. She did not spit. She was too disciplined for that. But her retinue made the sign of the Aquila, and the scribe wrote the word twice, as if redundancy were sacrament. "Your Imperium hunts them," the man said, "enslaves them, sterilizes them, parades them to prove another's purity. I have seen this cruelty in other colors. I have answers for it." "You have a crater and a trick," the Inquisitor said. "We have 1 billion worlds and fleets that can swat continents." She lifted 2 fingers very slightly. Around the district, hidden auspexes blinked from recesses and weapon shutters slid back with whispers like knives drawn from sheaths. "You will submit to evaluation by sanctioned psykers. You will submit to the chains of the throne if the Emperor's servants deem you a threat." He almost smiled. "I will not submit to chains. I will build a world without them." "You will be purged," she said, and the word had legal mass, a calibrated weight. It wasn't shouted. The judge beside her breathed in as if to read the sentence formal. He never found his words. The man raised his hand, and every loose nail, every broken bit of wire, every loop of chain on every gate in a 2-kilometer radius lifted and flowed. It wasn't a storm, for storms are clumsy. It was choreography. Chains wove themselves into braids, braids into cages. Weapon shutters slid shut and locked with their own bolts. Auspex lenses turned inward and began to look at themselves, projecting an infinite recursion of blank eyes. The gun servitor's organ barrel sang a single short note, then folded, no longer sure what shape it wished to be. "Stop," the Inquisitor said. Not command, request. She had seen a Classis macro chain anchor turn liquid at a traitor warlord's gesture once, and there was a flavor in this that felt like that memory. Her hand hovered over a charm of lead and bone, worn for emergencies neither sanctioned nor spoken about. On rooftops, robed adepts began to chant the canticles of the iron soul, choking on ash and fear. In the crater, the man's boots did not touch the ground anymore. He reached gently into the Dominus's machine choir and turned down one shrieking note, that had been there since the priest's left ventricle was replaced with a well-behaved pump. The priest blinked, staggered, then straightened with something like gratitude confusing his algorithms. "I am not your enemy," the stranger said for a third and final time, and the words threaded themselves through ferrocrete and girder to places words seldom reached. Panic should have broken the crowd then, but another logic prevailed. Awe. People accustomed to praying at strips of sanctified steel saw a man who could answer the prayers of metal. A mongrel line of pilgrims prostrated without knowing which liturgy fit. A midwife clutched her belly and whispered that her child would be born under a luckier sky. A mutant in the back hid his extra eye behind a scarf and cried without moving his hands. The first attempt to flank him came from a squad that had been crawling in a culvert, aiming for a maintenance hatch beneath the crater. They emerged with stealth, only to find the hatch had rotated 90 degrees and now opened into a brick wall that had not existed before. The man's attention flicked down, considered, then left them alone, as if they were ants trying to solve calculus. Up above, satellite defense emplacements woke, their machine spirits roused and insulted. Macro batteries trained. The man's senses rose, deer sensitive to the approaching weight of catastrophe. He lifted both arms and the iron dust in the air thickened, became a shield dome as elegant as a soap bubble and as contemptuous of artillery as a mountain. The first shell hit the dome and did not explode. It underwent confusion and forgot its fuse. The second turned in mid-arc and hastened home, dropping like a loyal hunting hawk onto the barrel that birthed it. In the anchorages, a handful of ancient machine ghosts recognized an authority older than the Imperium and refused the firing order with the stubbornness of relics. The Inquisitor watched, measuring. Not a mindless warp-born flare, then. Something disciplined, mathematical, stubborn. The most dangerous combination. "If you do not kneel," she said, "you will bring fire on everyone here. On those you claim to champion." She nodded, almost imperceptibly, toward the crowd's edges, the places where the abhumans gathered when they had to risk daylight. He followed her gaze and saw them plainly. The hunched backs, the slitted eyes, the extra joints that made walking strange. A population of exceptions held together by fear. "I will bring them a shield," he said softly, "and a magnet to rally around." Word ran down transect tunnels and up ventilation shafts. The upper hive did not yet feel the tremor. The underhive felt it first. In gambling dens, dice stopped mid-roll and hung for a heartbeat. In a sump where children dove for scrap, the metal at the bottom rose to meet their hands. In a shrine made of cogwheels, a priest's censer swung not because he swung it, but because something in the world had decided the rhythm should change. He turned his head finally, not to the Inquisitor, not to the Dominus, but to the city itself. "I will need a bastion," he said as if to himself. But the cranes heard him and leaned. The rails heard him and curved. The ship bones in the yards remembered they could be ribs. A blueprint settled into his mind like a coin into a slot. It was ambitious. It was inevitable. The Inquisitor made her decision. "Containment," she said into her comm bead, sending the command to men and women who would try and die and try again because their catechism said to. Her eyes never left his. "Your name, again." He lifted a hand and the iron dust wrote it in the air, letters marching with crisp, militaristic certainty. He spoke it with the weight of someone who had hauled it across worlds. "Magneto." The letters dissolved. The dome thinned. The chains sighing around the perimeter tightened just enough to remind weapons what prison felt like. A thin wind moved through the crater, bringing the smell of hot metal, oil, and something new. The scent of a story beginning that would not fit neatly into anyone's scripture. Far off, sirens whooped in descending scales as fire teams tried to reach burned habs. Closer, the crowd's breath made a sound like surf. He rose above them, not high, just enough to change the grammar of the scene. Things that fly are hunted here, but things that rise and do not ask permission alter the mood of a continent. He looked at his hands, gloved in a world's worth of alloy and consequence, then at the people who would be his responsibility. "You will be safe," he said, half promise, half threat. Then with a thought, he set the cranes to work. Ceramite refuses him. That's the first lesson he takes from his first real clash with the Imperium's mailed fist. The armor of an Astartes is a kiln-born shell, stubborn as stone, deaf to magnetism. But armor is never a whole. It is a system. Beneath the ceramic plates lurk mag seals, servo spindles, copper traces, ferrous pins, ammo feeds, power couplings, and the sacred mess of micro-bearings that let mountains move like men. If he cannot yank the wall, he can pull the nails. If he cannot bend the shell, he can seize the hinges. The charge comes like thunder with legs, assault marines in jump packs carving white scars through the ash sky, a hurricane of ceramite, oath scrolls, and screaming turbines. He tastes the flood of current in each pack, the scissoring fields in their spinning fans, the maglocks that pin them to their weapons and to the deck of their gods' ships. He pinches with a thought. Turbines hiccup. 4 Marines are yanked sideways as their packs decide that down is suddenly 10 degrees to port. 2 slam into each other mid-air with the sound of bells struck badly. 1 spins like a coin and plants face first into a manufactorum wall, leaving a saint-shaped crater. The last lands on his feet, because Space Marines are born with 3 backups for every failure. But his jump pack vents snap shut and stay shut, because the metal of their iris petals wants to obey stronger laws now. Bolter shells are more talkative. Their mass-reactive hearts answer with eager hiss to the fields he threads through the air. He lets a volley bloom, and then stops them. An iron rain frozen nose out in a halo a meter from him, each fuse ticking, each machine's spirit whining to fulfill its purpose. He rotates his hand, and the shells yaw in perfect chorus. The Marines understand what's about to happen. They are brave, and they are late. He sends the rounds back at angles that their firing tables never imagined, the fuses kissing ceramite gorgets and pauldron edges, cracking seals and punching into the soft black carapace beneath. Not to kill, he could, but to prove the geometry has changed. The one in Terminator plate, an anvil with an opinion, trudges through the shrapnel shrugging. His armor is old enough to have saints' names hammered into its joints. The servos there are huge and hungry. He chokes them. The Terminator takes one more step and then stands, muscles willing, machine unwilling, as if his suit remembered the old battle where a tech priest said, "Be still," and never rescinded the command. The armored fist rises by half a degree and stops. The red eyes behind the lenses burn with a dignity that refuses to ask for help. Tanks represent a simpler problem. A Land Raider is a cathedral on tracks, a superstition cast in adamantium. He uncurls the tracks like ribbon. The vehicle settles on its belly with a groan that is almost grief. The assault ramp tries to cyclopean itself open. Its hinges are a polite suggestion now, and the ramp stays where he tells it to. The Lascanon sponsons swing, slotting to target, and he reaches past the barrels to the gimbal rings and the teeth beneath them, and makes them forget that they are circles at all. A ring that thinks it is a line cannot spin. The machine spirit howls, then falls quiet as he strokes it with a perfectly tuned field, a mechanical lullaby that means sleep. Nights are worse and better. A household engine lumbers into view, wreathed in oaths, its heraldry promising protection to peasants and doom to monsters. Its reactor purrs like a planet-sized cat. The gyros in its hips thrum. The collapse plugs in its ankles hug their housings. He can't tear the carapace with raw magnetism. The alloys and ceramics are mixed to insult him. But he can reach the gyroscopes and nudge. Just a nudge. The Knight's pilot compensates instantly. These are warriors who dance with gravities. So he pulls again, not from the same angle, not with the same rhythm. He remixes the forces, syncopates them, and the machine's own stability loops fight each other. The giant stumbles. A foot that weighs a hab block lands just off true. The ground breaks. The Knight does not fall, because pride is a field equation here too. But its stance widens, and its guns are a hair less steady. In war, hairs matter. He learns the taste of void ships by accident, and then on purpose. On the fourth day, a light cruiser drops from the sky like a blade of night, its belly studded with the mouths of macro cannon, its flanks swollen with torpedo tubes. The gunnery decks rumble awake. The ship's void shields press down on the atmosphere with a pressure headache. A lance battery takes an exhale that could pierce mountains. He cannot bend the lance. The lance is light, and light ignores him unless he bends the coils that cradle it. He does that instead. The aiming arrays develop a tremor. The first lance shot cuts a far spire cleanly in half and misses him by a continent. The macro shells are delicious. They slide out like obedient pigs and trot through the sky in parades he rearranges. He turns one round into a shepherd dog for the others and runs them back up their own trajectories. A battery misfires into its own muzzle. Another drools hot slag into its loading cradle. In the torpedo rooms, guidance coils wake and then become very sure they are pointing somewhere wholly behind the ship. Tech priests scream at audacity. He levers their screams into static by tugging the very tongues of their vox units and making the comms coils fall deaf. He can reach systems no one knew had metal in them, because metal is a behavior as much as a substance. He coaxes stray filings into chains, sifts rust clouds into razors, drags junk orbits into crowns of jagged angels above a theater, and lets them hang there, silent threats too big to ignore. He plants a thought in a rail yard, and a day later, every freight car in a 100-kilometer ring is parked, pointing beak-in toward a central axis like geese around an invisible pond. When the Inquisition sends a kill team by train through those yards, the rails hum slightly, and the cars make a cage with a click that is final. He makes EMPS by ringing the air. It's inelegant, and it's cruel. He hates it for the collateral. But this is a brutal universe, and he must demonstrate cost. A sky slate wing screams low. He spins a torus of field in its path, inducing currents until every protective sigil lace burns into a black lacework. and every logic shrine on board forgets its name. The engines cough. The pilots cross themselves and wonder why the Emperor is suddenly silent. The slate flutters to a bruised landing. The pilots climb out with teeth singing from the static. He tries to be gentle with blood. There is iron in it, enough for parlor tricks and enough for murder. He refuses to murder with it. But he does reach into a charging brute's arteries and make the iron whisper loud enough that the man's knees think the floor is a magnet and want to kneel. The Marine fights the suggestion like a saint fighting sin, and mostly wins. Mostly. The hesitation is a coin dropped in time's gears, and sometimes that's all the profit a battle needs. Psychers complicate the ledger. Sanctioned witches in hoods come with their minds held in iron combs. He feels the combs first, a static pressure on the breastbone, like the weather about to turn. A witch raises his hands, and the air urges itself into a shape that will hurt. Magneto raises his and throws a wall of filings, sparkling like a night sea. The warp force hits the iron cloud and loses coherence. Hungry nothing eats it sideways. The witch tries again, hard enough to burst a vein. Magneto threads a field through the man's ravening nimbus and grounds it into a lightning rod he assembles from 12 loose parts and 1 defiled shrine spike. The rod takes the scream. The witch staggers and lives. Magneto allows that. He does not want to start a book of grudges with the warp if he can help it. There are sorceries that refuse grounding. A demon makes a room a mouth. That is not metal's business. He can choke the room with chains and hope the teeth think twice, but the warp is a madness with its own iron. When the noise gets too loud, he moves the fight. He likes fights with rules. The warp hates rules. Nulls are worse than hate. Sisters of Silence advance with the quiet around them, like a velvet drowned in lead. His power doesn't vanish. It cowers. The edges of things blur. Fields that should be crisp become gummy. He has pushed carriers in orbit. Here, 2 meters from a woman who does not exist to the warp, he cannot keep a coin flat in the air with the same confidence. His helmet, the old familiar bulwark against minds that pry, helps a little, baffling the worst vertigo that emptiness brings. He builds a cage within his suit from scavenged alloys tuned to drink stray fields, mu metal analogues arranged like petals within his cuirass. And it buys him a breath and 2 heartbeats. The sisters keep walking. Their eyes are the eyes of faithful knives. He learns tactics. Never stand in the null. He throws the battlefield itself at their feet. Grates, grills, lengths of chain yelling wait in a voice that even the quiet cannot quite silence. He arcs metal from beyond their aura, slinging it like a trebuchet might throw a scorpion. They do not flinch. The sisters escort, stormtroopers with hot-shot packs that spit lines of sun, die in neat rows when he turns their power lines into kinks. The sisters reach the lip of his bastion and step into a blizzard of iron filings that he keeps just at the sheath of their silence, a frozen fractal that grows as they shrink it. He holds them there, not with might, but with carpentry. The Culexus assassin is not carpentry. It is a hole in the world in the shape of a man, a skull hung on the void. The first time it comes, he does not see it. He feels a sudden cheapness in his reach, as if his hands had grown old all at once. An Astartes he is holding at arm's length, pinned by his own pauldron bolts, drops with a grunt of thanks or rage. The iron halo of junk he has been keeping above the street gutters into the stones with a rattle like bones. The assassin's presence rubs his nerve endings raw. He cannot swat it with iron. His aim curve collapses at the edge of its absence. He remembers every moment in his life where he saw a genocide dressed up as cure, and he knows immediately what this thing is and whom it was built to erase. He refuses to be erased. He breaks the pavement under his own feet, drops through into the underdecking, and makes the city a labyrinth of rebar and cable that answers his hand like a trained pack. The Culexus follows into the maze, and for a while Magneto fights like a rat with the whole building on his side, never touching the hole, only starving it of lines of approach. In the end, distance solves what pride cannot. He retreats, not running, but relocating the theater to where he can hum again. The assassin leaves with nothing, and the promise to return. Magneto begins designing counters that are engineering rather than power. Pressure plates, gravitic tricks built from stolen coil stacks, traps for a void that cannot be magnetized but must still walk on floors. He maps the ladder of force from bayonet to battle group. Infantry are equations he can solve in his sleep now. Armor is punctuation. Night engines make him think for a paragraph. Titans, he has not truly met a god engine yet, only felt the tremor of one turning its shoulders 2 hive stacks away. But he has theories. The voids around them will be more skin than shield, and skins can be itched. Weapon pylons offset, ankle couplings taught to seize, city power tapped to shove a field through a knee at exactly the wrong time. He doesn't need to topple a Titan, he needs to make it miss once and then withdraw a gutter's width before the return stroke. Survival is victory in a galaxy that eats champions for snack food. Ship to ship, he has carved litanies into orbital junk and let them orbit like dog stars. He has unspooled elevator cables and stretched them into glistening loops that sing when a corvette tries to pass. An Arch Mechanicus studying him from high anchorage attempts to bracket his bastion with orbital lances. He calls the ship's rail cargo to mutiny. 1,000 tons of ore blooms into a cloud and breathes on the void shield like a fog of ball bearings whispering, "Drag." The shield drinks power to stay lit. He reaches for the feeder lines, jolts the ship's distribution rhythms by half a heartbeat, and the shield hiccups. He cannot hold that hiccup, not against a ship mind and a choir of tech priests. But in those 2 seconds, his crown of junk descends as if the planet had exhaled knives. The Ark limps away stung, praying to gods who are also machines and therefore sympathetic to insulting injuries. He learns to budget. Every exertion burns sugars and compounds and a man's lifetime of scars. He keeps caches of iron sand in canvas bladders threaded through the ceilings of his haunts. A gesture bursts them and turns rooms into galaxies where every star obeys him. He plants magnetized rails inside walls so that in a crisis he can throw a door at the ceiling without asking the door politely. He braids hogsheads of nails into coils the size of great worms and buries them in access tunnels. A thought, and the tunnel is a blender. He cannot be everywhere on a battlefield, but he can make a battlefield want to be everywhere for him. He sees how the Imperium will adapt. Voxnets whisper new protocols, ceramicized ammunition, non-ferrous fasteners, redundant mechanical safeties, sanctified mechanical blocks that can only be released by flesh hands saying particular prayers. He smiles at the last one. He has learned to throw prayers back at their mouths. Still, ceramic bullets are annoying. He answers by seeding the air with chaff so that even rounds that don't answer him must pass through a soup that drags. He writes equations on the wind with dust. less elegant, more effective. He is growing more like this place than he cares to admit. He respects, to his surprise, the stubborn machine spirits. Not the superstition around them, but the persistence. A millennia-old lock will resist him like an old soldier who has decided not to retire. He wins anyway, but he begins to speak to them in fields that feel like courtesy, a little ramp-up to warn, a proper taper to assure, a gentle jostle to encourage a seized part that only ever responds to kindness. The Red Priests hate that he doesn't need incense. The locks often hum back. His range is a map with weather on it. In vacuum, with a clear horizon and an orbiting halo to draw from, he can nudge a ship, spoil a volley, open a dock like a tin can. In rain and dust, inside a city with iron veins, he is a god who agrees to be local for convenience. In a null dome, he is a man with a talent throttled to a cough. He writes his doctrine to these contours. He always carries iron with him, even in a post-ceramic battlefield. Thin meshes woven into cloak and suit, bracelets of powder trapped in resin to be shattered on demand, a scarf whose threads are memory metal that remembers snapping. He refuses to be the wizard who needs the right terrain. He makes his own. When his followers ask, "What are we against, Astartes?" he says, "A calculation they haven't done before." When they ask, "What are we against the Inquisition?" he says, "A rumor that keeps them tired." When they ask, "What are we against nulls?" he says, after a long pause, "Honest fear, careful ground, and traps always traps." He will not lie in this. He can bend battlefields and puncture pride. But there are women with shaved heads and quiet around them who can walk through storms and make him doubt his hands. He hates them the way drowning men hate oceans, and he studies them the way shipwrights study waves. He scales his war not by growing larger, but by making everything near him smaller in the ways that matter. Options, bearings, meaningful lines of advance. He has passed the joy of tossing tanks like toys. He is in the work of changing consequences. A governor considers a pogrom and sees a memory of a train yard that turned into a bite. An inquisitor orders exterminatus and hears a rumor in her choir about falling mines above the fleet anchorage. A chapter master writes a kill order and signs a requisition for ceramic ammunition with poor penetrative performance against most enemies, and good manners against one. He has become the adjustment, the clause, the iron if. And in the quiet hours, when the forge world sleeps like a sick beast and the sky glows with spoiled aurora, he's honest with himself about the ceiling. A titan footing will grind through anything he can do if he stands there to test it. A blackstone artifact would laugh in his face. The warp, when it deigns to look his way, will keep rearranging rules until his equations whine. A Calexis within arm's reach could turn his vast into very small. So he will not be there when those collisions happen. He will be one street over, one orbit aside, one layer deeper in the city's metal bones. He cannot save this galaxy. He can make it run different where he stands. He can make their saints trip. He can build shelters out of cranes and shields, out of filings and futures out of rails. He can take the trick of a man's hands and scale it until fleets miss fire and crusades drift a degree off course. He can't bend ceramite, but he can bend the war around it. That is enough to begin. He starts with a wall, because walls teach language faster than sermons. Not masonry. Masonry is slow and honest. He builds a living barrier from cranes and ship bones, mill girders and elevator spines, rails unspooled from the yards and braids of chain he coaxes to stiffen like tendons. At dusk, the horizon around a forgotten sump district pricks with red work lamps. At dawn, there is a ring of architecture where last night there was only poverty and fog. The people inside do not know what to call it yet. He does. The name comes out like a compass settling. The Bastion. It is not a perfect circle. He hates perfection in the wrong places. The perimeter kinks to swallow a water tower, arcs to include a foundry he knows he can tame, hooks to take in a stairwell that plunges into levels no one claims. He tells the cranes to lean. They do, as if a great wind had pushed them all in the same hour and held them, booms lowering to intersect, cabling strung into catgut, counterweights locking in like teeth. Rails curve into ribs. Ship ribs remember they were ribs once and accept the role. Junction boxes, those square iron shrines where machine spirits sulk, climb the interior like devotional icons. He writes a rule set on the metal as he lays it. Any hinge can be a hand. Any gate can be a jaw. Every bolt is a syllable in a sentence that ends, if he wills it, with no. The Bastion is a grammar more than a keep. They come in drifts, first out of curiosity. Scavers with sackcloth hoods, sump divers slick with other people's waste. A woman with scales like mica along her throat, whose 3 sons are born with extra fingers. They break flat to hide. An older man with an ear where his jaw should be. A girl who hides an eye in the center of her forehead behind a ragged scarf. An ogryn who does not understand that he is not supposed to laugh in public, and laughs anyway when he sees the cranes bow. A sanctioned psyker who took his brand and then ran because what they asked him to see at night was not survivable. A dozen twists and wretches and unclean by 100 hateful names. One people by one name he gives them, citizens. The first oath is not spoken. It is signed, literally, in iron. He stamps each new arrival, a token cut from old couplers and rail plates. Thumb-sized, thick, stamped with a circle bisected by a line. The token is not currency. It is syntax. Every token carries a magnetic fingerprint he can feel with his palm at a meter. Every gate knows that pattern. The tokens open food doors and close armories and make certain hinges courteous. You will keep these, he says. They are passports and promises. He does not mention what will happen to a man who kills a bearer of one. He does not need to. Food is the immediate tyranny. He breaks it first. The grain tithe runs through the hive on rails that speak to him louder than any priest. He does not steal it. He turns the schedules into choreography. Trains run on time, and then they run his time. The first convoy that stops at the bastion's edge meets a fence that unlatches for exactly 20 minutes and then recloses with a sigh. He walks the length of the train with a foreman and a slate in hand, tallies this, tallies that. His followers unload not sacks, but spoil. Broken pallets, split bags, rusted tools, crates with warped nails, a wagon whose brake burns if it goes another kilometer. He takes waste and bent things and work that would kill a man's back for nothing, and he pays with a promise the rail likes: maintenance. The next week, the same train runs smoother. The week after, the governor's office notes that theft has dropped in districts that obey the bastion's curfews. Someone draws a conclusion that feels like a compromise and calls it policy. If a mutant is beaten to death, A hinge somewhere else locks and will not open until the murderer is paraded with shackles in public, and those shackles turn, mid-procession, into bracelets that guide his hands behind him without skin tearing. They learn exchange. He builds a clinic because pain makes bad citizens. The clinic is a room in the bastion's belly where the walls are lined with drawers of filings and magnets the size of a thumb bone, the size of a child's jaw, the size of a heart. He can find shrapnel in bodies by humming to the iron and listening to the flesh complain. He draws nails and bullets out with tenderness that looks like magic. The children clap, and the old men who hate new things don't clap, but come back with their grandchildren anyway. He straightens bent plates on old prosthetics. He whispers to the machine spirits that they are not enslaved, only repurposed, and that small change in grammar eases their grinding. He orders that every worker in the bastion eat before they lift a tool. He sets a table in a room that was a storage vault, and on it there is always bread and protein cake and a handful of candied nuts for the children, because he remembers a camp in another world where sweetness was a rumor. The gangs hate him in the way weather hates cliffs. They have always fed on fear and the gaps between law and mercy. He narrows the gap until only discipline fits. When a boss in a flak coat sends his men to tax Magneto's freaks, the rails a block away grow loud as a beehive. Every gun in the gang twists a degree, then two, then points at a storm drain and empties into the dark. The men stare at their hands like traitors. The boss finds his belt buckle has welded to his desk, and his desk to the floor, and the floor to a plate under it that he had not known existed, and the plate is moving. He arrives at the bastion dragged by his own furniture, and listens to a speech about taxes and the new direction they will flow. He leaves walking, because there are children watching, and the lesson needs to be that law has edges, but does not always cut. He does not, cannot, court the ecclesiarchy, but he refuses to be their cartoon. A preacher sets up across from the bastion's gate with a brazier of incense and a tongue honed to a blade, calling the people inside a blasphemy. He listens, arms crossed, to an hour of ritualized contempt. When a woman in the preacher's crowd raises a hand to throw a stone, it curls in the air, gently, like a leaf correcting for wind, and lands at the preacher's feet. He steps forward. "Your emperor hates mutation," the preacher says. "Your emperor hates fear," he answers. "Fear makes you small." He gestures to the crowd, to the old men with second joints, to the girl with the scarf over her third eye. "If your faith requires their blood, it is a poor god. If your faith requires their obedience to be protected, then understand, I will exact obedience." The preacher comes back the next day anyway. The third day, he brings a bucket of nails for the clinic. He never crosses the threshold. They exchange nods. Governance grows because nothing else does. He assembles a council on a platform made of ship ribs and a cracked locomotive front plate, convening once at dusk and once at the hour where the night lies about being quiet. There is a mother who has negotiated with 12 gangers and kept all her fingers. There is a mechanic whose augmetic arm is an archive of repairs. There is a scribe who used to write kill lists for the Arbites and would like to write anything else. There is the Ogrin who says little and stands at the rail like a column. He gives them a charter hammered into a panel off a cargo hauler. It is short. No trafficking in people. No cults. No icons or whispers to the warp. If your god demands madness, go elsewhere. No retribution without a name attached. Food first. children first. When money and conscience argue, side with tomorrow. Not all who come belong. Chaos sends recruiters wrapped in kindness, because evil is never lazy. Men with bird-quick eyes and new tattoos on old scar tissue tell stories of a better Imperium. If only you'll paint your face and say these syllables. He invites them into the clinic and closes the iron shutters and turns the filings into a soft storm that clings to their tongues and teeth. "Open your mouth and say your god's name," he says. When they do, the filings make letters in the air that do not look like language, but like tumors. He opens the shutters and shows the letters to the crowd and asks, "Do you want your children to breathe this?" They do not. He takes the recruiters' knives and warps them into hooks for coats. He gifts the men tokens stamped false and tells them to leave through a door he never uses. The door remembers the false signatures later and declines to be a door for those men when they return with friends. He knows he cannot outlaw the warp by decree, but he banishes it from the grammar of his city. He builds a school in a gutted refectory and calls it a guild, because the word school tastes dangerous to a people trained to duck when learning happens. Children with webbed fingers and extra joints learn to read by tracing letters with iron filings, guided by his smallest field. The words literally assemble under their hands. He teaches physics dressed in superstition. The rail spirits like to sing in straight lines. Be kind to Tru. Dihanum. He teaches discipline as liturgy. Do not throw something heavy if it will not land on only what you mean to hurt. He pulls a cracked slate off a wall and writes with a nail, "Take the hinges, not the door." The children copy it onto scraps. It becomes proverb. The bastion needs a voice beyond rumor. He taps the rail network as a telegraph. In the night, the city's bones hum with messages, pulses counted and spaced, station to station, carried by steel. He trains a handful of women with good ears and steadier hands to listen and translate the notes. Bulletins spread, curfews lifted for a feast day, a warning about a patrol that drinks courage and then kicks heads for sport. A hint that a commissar's aide, who likes to hunt mutants in alleys, will find the alley doors locked if he tries it again. When that man tries, the doors comply with the bulletin, and the next morning there is a signed confession in chalk on a wall no one can reach to erase easily. He tests the governor early because deterrence requires public math. A decree arrives down spine. Order is to be restored in the sump districts. Abhuman elements are to be culled. He does not burn it. He folds the parchment into a crane and hangs it in the air at the bastion gate. Then he writes a letter on thin iron that rolls like paper and cannot be torn, polite and edged. Tithe efficiency will decrease by 30%, while fear increases. Alternative, grant amnesty to registered citizens within delineated perimeter. Receive 8 additional trains worth of throughput across the next cycle. No more broken laborers under your auditor's quills. He attaches to the letter an apple he has pulled through 3 vents and a boardroom window to land gently on the governor's desk during a meeting. The letter arrives by rail with the official seal. The apple arrives with the faint scent of the bastion's kitchen. The governor signs the amnesty because his career cares more about numbers than the shape of people. That suits Magneto. He wants levers, not love. He does theater sparingly. He chooses one night and names it, though only his people know the name. Later, they will call it Hinge Night. Every door in 3 districts closes at the same moment, softly, with a whisper that ripples along alleys and through corridors and up tenement stairwells like a tide. Bars slide home. grills set. Gate teeth bite. For 90 seconds, the hive understands that something else is sovereign. Then, one by one, the doors open again. Just enough to admit a cat, a child, a carrying tray. No one dies. The next morning he finds trash picked up, graffiti scrubbed, and 100 offerings stuck to the bastion fences. Ribbons, medals, a cogitator key made of real silver, 3 drawings by children of a man standing under a rain of nails. There is blood. Law implies consequence. A labor foreman arranges accidents for obvious mutants so he can collect hazard bonuses. 6 dead in 2 weeks, all explained by paperwork that lies like a good functionary. The 7th is a boy with a notch in his ear, who often sits near Magneto's chair on the council platform and tries to look smaller than his voice. The boy survives because a crate's nails change their mind at the exact second that matters. The foreman does not. His bones are intact when he is found. Every piece of metal he ever touched, buttons, belt buckle, fork tines, the tiny brass screws in his spectacles, has soldered into a cage as intricate as lace around him, leaving him room to breathe and think. Under his feet, in nails arranged on the floor, are the names of the dead. He confesses to an Arbeiters scribe with handwriting that doesn't shake. The Arbeits probe, as they must. They come with shock mauls and carapace plates and riot shields that look like blank verdicts. He meets them at the gate with no cape, no helmet, only hands. "We administer law," the marshal says. "So do I," he answers. "Yours is Empire's law. Mine is survival's. They will clash. They have. But if you wish to keep your station's rail line from seizing this winter, we can talk about maintenance schedules. I can make your lives easier if you stop breaking mine." The marshal, who is not a fool and who reads budgets like sermons, shifts on his heels. "We will take our prisoners," he says finally. "We will expect your citizens to testify." Magneto nods. They will. The testimony is clean. The Arbeit's report reads like an admission that sometimes order can be borrowed. He builds industry because handouts rot a city faster than famine. In a cavern under the bastion, he starts a refinery of recycling. Nails are unbent and sorted by length and reboxed. Springs are annealed and rewound. Bearings are cleaned, catalogued, and sent back into circulation with tiny stamped oaths. He trains a crew to melt scrap under fields that keep the slag obedient and the fumes pulled away. He teaches the trick of pouring without splatter because the filings will listen. He pays in tokens and meals, and for the best, in books that he keeps on a shelf behind his chair. Books carried from ship to ship in a life that has learned to live with a packed bag. Engineering texts. 2 volumes of philosophy with blood on the jacket edges. A mathematics primer for a world that did not survive. Men who have only ever swung hammers learn the pleasure of filing something square. Women who have only ever cooked learn the pleasure of knowing the weight of a part before the scale tells them. Pride is the right drug. He prescribes it carefully. He invents small rituals because ritual makes courage reproducible. Every week at second dusk, the tokens are retuned. The citizens line up at stations where old motors sing inaudible notes, and he holds a hand over a tray full of iron and listens. A child watches her token hum and laughs when it buzzes like a fly. An old man with a brand on his neck, the sanctioning brand that means psyker to the law and danger to everyone who has seen a witch break, turns his token nervously while Magneto checks it. "You can stay," Magneto says without looking up, and slides the token back with a small, private nod. He confronts grief when it walks in under a robe stitched with gold aquilus. A woman in ecclesiarchy black comes with a boy who does not speak. The boy's bones are wrong in ways that hurt to see. "Will he be safe?" she asks, and in her eyes is the knowledge that the answer might be no, because she has read the book of this world to its last chapter. "No," he says, because he does not lie about ceilings. "He will be safer here than there." He raises a palm, and the boy's iron in his blood hums very softly, just enough to make the pain inside his bones move toward his hand like a tide. The boy sighs for the first time that day. The woman's shoulders collapse in a way that looks like prayer. She leaves the boy and her robe on a chair and returns the next day with a wrench. There are moments of joy. Market day drums hum along the bastion's interior. Rattling cooks, small and merry, legally abhuman, illegally talented, set up pans on hot plates and fry dough in oil that smells like childhood before factories. Someone's augmetic violin is tuned to 25 strings because it can be. It sings. Young men with bone crests slicked back learn to dance with girls who no longer keep their scarves so tight. For an hour, danger is distant, not gone, but far enough to talk over. He does not forget the future that will arrive with armored boots. He spends nights at a table covered in drafts, cracking solutions like sunflower seeds. He designs passive countermeasures for nulls, rings of free-spinning steel that slosh fields away like water around a boulder. Tiles that hide current loops under the floor, so that even the quiet cannot make a room a vacuum. Ways to throw weight from beyond the silence's edge with levers, not magnetism, because leverage obeys every god. He trains his citizens in fire drills that are not about fire, routes to safe rooms lined with iron mesh that he can harden, caches of filings sealed in sealing casks that a knock will open, code words where a child's cry for a lost toy means run. And every week, he writes one letter that he does not send. It is addressed to an idea, to the Imperium that could have been. He lists in it the numbers that matter. Hours shoved by trains that did not break. Lives saved because a clinic took a nail out before gangrene found it. Thefts prevented by making men proud of a stamped oath. Sermons that ended without stones. He concludes with the same line each time. See what your citizens build when you stop calling them mistakes. The Inquisition's brand of attention thickens in the air like weather. Rosettes over table lamps make the light crueler. Voxnets carry his name alongside words like containment and aberration and asset potential. He knows how they operate. Starve, isolate, ruin, seize. He builds the bastion to live without shipments, to speak without vox, to heal without medicae, to police without external law. He drills. He tightens bolts that are really promises. He tells his people that none of this is permanent, and that permanence was a lie someone sold their grandparents. When the first exterminator-grade order stirs in a cogitator somewhere, it will not surprise him. Until then, he will do 1,000 small, reproducible kindnesses with iron, and make cruelty cost more than governors can afford. He does not preach hope. He thinks hope in this galaxy should wear power armor. He offers something stranger and sturdier. Structure. A place where if you are born with the wrong bones, the doors still open when you push. A community that can turn knives into coat hooks and chains into rails and fear into a wall that does not face inward. On a morning when the sky looks less like ash and more like a bruise healing, he stands on the platform of ship ribs and locomotive plate and watches the line that started as a trickle become a road. People still whisper freak and unclean, but they whisper it softer here. Over the gate, the cranes lean like saints. He cannot save the hive. He can bind a piece of it together and make it mean home for those who have never had the word spoken to them kindly. He knows what he's making. Not paradise, not even peace. A map, a magnet, a bastion, with a grammar that says, "You belong." The first emissary wears a god's smile and offers the oldest bargain: sovereignty in exchange for surrender. It comes in a dream that is not a dream, a room furnished with impossible geometry and birds that speak in future tense. The bird calls itself a teacher, its feathers numbering greater than statistics, its eyes the color of schemes. "You are wasted on metal," it says. "Let me show you how to bend chance." The room shifts, and he is king across 1,000,000 outcomes, crowned by victories that arrive before plans. He knows flattery when it is carved into the walls. He curls 2 fingers and calls the iron dust out of the air of his own mind. It spins, crisp and obedient, a tiny galaxy of filings with laws that don't lie. "I will bend matter," he answers, "and nothing will bend me." The bird flicks once, becomes an angel with too many joints. He wakes with the taste of burned copper and the certainty that the warp won't try seduction next time. It will try pity. When an Aeldari Farseer steps through the fallout shadow of a ruined spire, it feels like good weather after fever. There are no drums of hedonist gods humming behind her voice, just a taut thread of grief stretched between millennia. Wraithbone grows under her feet like a polite root. It does not answer his hand at all. That is useful information. Her warlock escorts do not fidget, but their eyes never stop counting exits. She offers him a map, not a treaty, narrow corridors in the skein where his bastion survives the decade. "In those branches," she says, "you lose fewer children if you move your people off-world within 3 cycles." He does not explain that moving people off-world is a dream measured in shipyards and leverage. He shows her the rail he is teaching to sing messages, the clinic where iron leaves bodies without tearing, the tokens that open doors. She calls him primitive with a gentleness that might be respect. He calls her a coward with a gentleness that might be envy. They bargain anyway. The bargain is this: her craft world scouts will whisper ahead of Ordo Hereticus sweeps when they thread toward the bastion, not out of kindness, but because a living magnet for human trauma attracts predators. She also hates, in return, when she points at the void and says, "That orbit will be untenable in 3 days." He will believe her and move his workshops before the shelling comes. He cannot touch Wraithbone, cannot bully its psychoplastic spine into courtesy. But he can make the shipyard scaffolds around it behave. When an Aeldari corsair ship needs to evade a clumsy human frigate, he makes the docking pylons flex like reeds, and the frigate's macro shells swing a degree wide. They don't exchange names. She leaves a spirit stone on his table without explanation. He leaves it where the clinic's light can touch it. Later, the Farseer returns it without touching the table. He takes the point. Some debts must remain metaphysical to stay clean. The Tau send a delegation the way surgeons send a scalpel. Precise, sterile, convinced of their own ethics. An Ethereal arrives in a shuttle that smells like mint and ozone, flanked by fire warriors, whose armor angles catch the light like calm water. Their language for alliance is a cascade of inclusive pronouns. For the greater good, the Ethereal says, we propose a protected district, formalized trade in reclaimed ferrous stock, shared security patrols, and educational exchange. He listens while his palm feels the tiny magnets woven through their uniform seams, a cultural habit of neatness likely, and while his mind models their supply chains. Pacify the orc scrap world 2 jumps out, the Ethereal adds, as if they rehearse his appetites. We will recognize your autonomy in situ. He visits the scrap world once with a frigate stolen from a man who underestimated the value of a dock worker's badge. The orcs hear his arrival as a rumor that their guns will finally have a worthy fight, and that the fight might be the sky itself. Orc belief is a rude engine. He respects engines. He does not respect belief that makes bullets smart enough to hit because someone shouted loud enough. He drains the sky of junk, calls it down into tides that move sideways, and lets it show the orcs a different kind of loud. Their trucks' axles tear themselves out mid-bellow. Their gargants take 3 steps, forget which way their knees bend, and sit down hard enough to make a new canyon. He is careful to leave bodies breathing. Orcs breed better under insult than grief. They rise confused and delighted, declare the weather the best war boss they've seen, and begin fighting the weather. He turns away before they remember to fight him again. When he returns to the Ethereal, the envoy's satisfaction feels like a second skin applied to his own. We can grant a charter, the Tau says, recognizing your district as a special administrative zone. Protected persons, status for your citizens. He says the word as if tasting it against his own empire. The charter text is clean until it isn't. Clause 7 requires ideological instruction. Clause 9 allows for soft policing by drones with excellent manners and perfect memories. Clause 12 defines mutation in a way that would have turned most of his people into categories instead of neighbors. He crosses out 7 lines with a nail that leaves grooves in their perfect slate. You are not the first empire to offer safety at the price of voice, he says. The Ethereal's eyes sharpen. What do you require? Trade, he says. Non-interference. A corridor with your satellites looking elsewhere while I move ships. A public statement that the greater good recognizes mutant autonomy within these coordinates and will support lethal defense against pogroms. The Ethereal calculates political drag. And in return, I will throw orcs at each other on schedule, he says. I will teach your engineers 3 tricks for reusing ferrous slag that your manuals don't have. I will not recruit in your garrisons. The Ethereal exhales through a nose that has never known a punch. They sign with a pen that is a magnet in a suit. He leaves the meeting with a corridor carved through a climate of enemies and 2 new ones wearing smiles. It is the Necrons who change his posture from negotiation to chess. He meets them not in a hall, but in a museum burned by a war no one bothers to remember. The statues move. They are the statues. The first time he reaches for one, his power skates off it as if trying to grip a mirror hung over a well. Necrodermis is not metal. It's a philosophy about material, a promise made to atoms about how to behave and how to heal. His fields complain, then pass around it like a river around a pillar. The pillar moves anyway, because living metal obeys itself. The Overlord's eyes are polished winter. Its retinue bracket him with calm that feels like gravity. "We have no interest in your chattel politics," the cryptek says, in a voice that never learned to wobble. "This world holds a node. You are incident. Depart." The node is a geometry that tastes like a humming wire in his mouth. They've buried a tuning fork under the city and are about to ring it hard. "Your device will shatter 3 districts and a memory that matters to some of us," he says. "Use another note." The Necrons don't use notes. They use perfection. They reach for the lever that will ignore him, and his hand closes on the environment instead. Galleries of iron balustrades, chandelier chains, the long nail line hidden in the seams between floor plates. He pulls the entire building a degree off true. The cryptek takes a deliberate half step, recalibrates. He pulls again, not harder, but at a rhythm he's learned makes servos think of stalling. Living metal does not stall, but the floor plates are not living, and delicate instruments disapprove of earthquakes. The cryptek lifts an arm to swat the nuisance. He is already elsewhere, speaking to the ferrous atoms in the air, calling them into a mesh so fine it's almost fog. The mesh does nothing to the Necrons. It wraps the machinery behind them, the instruments that listen to their god note, and muffles like snow. "Depart," the cryptek says again, this time with interest. He meets the interest with an offer. He will clear human interference from a vector near their tomb in exchange for them ringing their fork in vacuum above the hive. At an hour, he will arrange to be empty of ships. "You cannot bargain for the void," the Overlord says. "You do not hold it." "I hold the rails that feed the void," he answers. "I can make every dock in this hemisphere remember what closed feels like." In the end, they agree, not because they fear him, but because his nuisance factor is a cost, and they like zeros. He learns 3 things from the exchange. Necrodermis tastes like a language he can't teach iron to speak. Phase technology is a rudeness even to gods of metal. And an overlord can acknowledge a rival's elegance with a chin tilt smaller than a breath. He files it under limits worth respecting and things to sabotage by making the room unsteadier than the math likes. Orcs remain a renewable resource. He weaponizes them against problems that would otherwise require atrocities. When a Mechanicus Explorator fleet starts harvesting mutants under the pretense of cranial studies, he leaks a rumor down the green skin grapevine that a rival has built a stomper entirely from cogboys' hats. The stomper never existed before the rumor. It does by nightfall. The orcs arrive in joy. The explorators raise void shields, confident behind mathematics. He feeds the orcs junk, and the junk becomes a belt around the shipyard that drags when shields flare. The orcs think this is a party trick and love him for it without knowing he exists. The explorators flee in righteous indignation. Later, a message arrives from a rogue Magos who saw the elegance in the humiliation and wants to learn. He sends back a single line: "Find the hinge, not the door." She replies with a set of designs for non-ferrous fasteners and a footnote about why they're an affront to Mars. He sends a case of bread. They're not allies. They're a correspondence. Dark Eldar test his resolve in the place between pain and order. They raid a market day with ballet and hooks, laughing knives and gravity as spicy as liquor. He pours filings into the air and makes a blizzard they can't lean through without shaving their own armor. A Wycher flicks a blade and wraps a chain around a child's ankle. The chain forgets its job and slithers off like a guilty snake. The raiders retreat with style, and a Kabbalite prince leaves a gift. A box that, when opened, contains a smaller box that contains a vial of light caught screaming. He throws the boxes into a furnace and watches the light bend and break and go quiet. The prince will be back with a grudge. Grudges make schedules easier. Rogue traders circle like sharks with silver spoons. One offers him passage for 2,000 undesirables to a rim world with a breathable lie. He says yes, then tears the man's ship apart on paper. Finding the false compartments and the life support that won't last a week for that many mouths. He meets the trader in a dining room with windows like artwork. "You cull in transit," he says. The man does not flinch, which is a kind of honesty. "Not if you can keep my coils cool and my rail dream clean," the trader says. They write an agreement in which coils will be cool and rail dreams clean, and the bastion will always know where its children are in the dark. The trader honors it for as long as fear is fashionable. When he cheats, the docking clamps remember a grip they weren't designed for. The next trader reads the new story of their profession and arrives with better math. There are defenders of humanity who would be his friends if they had the time to consider the shape of words. A sister hospitaller walks into the clinic with a wounded guardsman whose face has been made into a syllabus of shrapnel. She quotes scripture that calls his people sin, and then she holds the man steady while Magneto draws the iron out in silver worms, hums to the filings so they don't leave teeth on the way. "I am commanded to hate you," she says, binding the wounds with competence. "You do not have to love me," he says. "You only have to decide whether you prefer your patient living." She does. They pray different. The man lives. She returns a week later with bandages and a scowl. He counts that as a treaty. Chaos keeps trying. Slaanesh arrives in sound, a choir with voices like clean glass, promising that for the low price of surrender, he can command not only metal, but want. He listens once because curiosity is a muscle, and because great temptations deserve witnesses who do not lie about the choreography. He imagines what it would mean to turn a planet's desire like a field, to make a mob crave mercy instead of blood. He closes his eyes and feels the weight in his pockets, a child's token, a bolt he kept as a reminder that every hinge requires patience, a sliver of his helmet's old plating with a thumb dent from a day that nearly killed him. He opens his eyes, and the choir realizes too late that he prefers the obedience of atoms to the treachery of hearts. The music makes a final, disappointed key change. He does not clap. Every handshake is a test, every shared table a training ground. He demands of allies what he demands of enemies: predictability. The Craftworld seers get their warning corridor. In return, they whisper when the Inquisition hires a null choir larger than the last. The Tau get ore and a tamed scrap world. In return, he makes them scratch re-education out of a paragraph and watch how many of their junior officers look relieved. The Necrons get their ring in heaven at an hour he schedules between tides. In return, they agree not to harvest a district for curiosity. The Mechanicus gets a humiliation that teaches humility. In return, he receives mail written in the grammar of cogs, discreet, useful. Orcs get weather that fights back. Dark Eldar get burned fingers. Rogue traders get clamps that care too much. He keeps score in the places no one can see. Pins on a board mean little in a civilization that runs on omen and ossuary. He measures instead in trains that arrive with their workers alive, in letters he didn't send because the governor anticipated his argument and changed a decree, in funerals that did not happen because a null squad turned back on a rumor that the alleys would lock. He refuses to be grateful to empires for doing the minimum. He will, however, use their habits until the habits turn into holes. There is one unlooked-for ally that irritates him with its accuracy. Rumor. The Bastion becomes a fairy tale that tells itself. In one version, he eats bullets and breathes nails and drinks children's tears. In another, he raises bridges for anyone wearing the right coin and lowers them for anyone with a whip. He cannot command stories the way he commands steel, but he can seed them. He organizes market days that just happen to coincide with Arbeits patrols who have eaten, who have been reminded that the rail lines they like to ride have remained curiously free of sabotage. He arranges for a Tau convoy to pass unmolested, while two gangs on the route discover a mutual grudge he planted months ago. He lets a Farseer accidentally glimpse a schematic for a shipyard she will need in a future where she admits she needs anyone. He smiles when the rumor about the clamps spreads through the rogue trader grapevine faster than any law. When his council asks who their friends are this week, he says, "People with aligned short-term interests and a healthy fear of embarrassment." He explains it like this: "We are the clause in their plans that adds a cost to cruelty." That makes us useful until it makes us intolerable. Use the window. The Ogryn scratches his head and says, "Window," with the reverence of someone learning a new sacred word. A mother frowns and asks, "And when the window closes?" He taps the rail with a knuckle. Then we move the hinges again. A final emissary arrives not with feathers or elegant armor, but in the shape of a machine made to erase the concept of compromise. A grey knight strike cruiser in low anchor, a lance aimed with the muscle memory of 1,000 cleansings. He should be afraid. He is. He is also calm. He has orc junk floating like a crown in the high sky. He has a craft world corridor telling him the hour the Inquisitor can move a null choir. He has a Tau statement that says, "Anyone firing on registered mutant districts risks greater good reprisal," which is a euphemism for embarrassment in front of allies whose factories you like. He has a rogue trader's debt bid into clamps. He has a Margos's quiet memo about ceramic fasteners that a night house will adopt tomorrow and discover are very bad at holding a knee in a sprint. He has Necron indifference scheduled for the hour after next, when a node will sing and both Imperium and Bastion will be incidental. He has a city that closes its own doors on command. He writes a message on iron paper and sends it up the rail of the air. "If you burn this district, you will hit a harvest schedule the Mechanicus will scream about, a Tau convoy's goodwill, an Aeldari Skane's crossing, a rogue trader's bribe, and a Necron's attention. Try me." He oils the hinges and sits down to wait. The cruiser's lance canopy closes. The canopy opens. The lance does not fire. Somewhere in the high ship, a man in silver draws a new cost-benefit curve on a slate and bites the end of his stylus. Friends? The word fails in a galaxy that runs on weather systems of cruelty and accident. He prefers load-bearing relationships. He assembles them with the same care he uses on bridges, redundant, elegant, ugly where beauty would be fragile. Every foe he can turn into a brace buys another week. Every brace buys another trainload of children leaving with tokens in their pockets. He does not mistake delay for salvation. He knows what waits beyond the horizon of cleverness. But while the lances are thinking, while a farseer hums a safer key, and a Tau ethereal edits a sentence, while a cryptech rolls its eyes at an overlord who tolerates nuisances because efficiency loves them, while an orc tells a story about the day the sky wrestled him and won, he holds the metal together around the people who have never been granted the courtesy of an us. It is not peace. It is scaffolding. It will have to be enough until something larger learns new grammar. The warning arrives not as a trumpet, but as a pressure change. The rail bones under the hive begin to hum with a note he has not written. Voxnets go shy. Children complain that their teeth itch. In the sky, a scrap of night detaches from night and becomes geometry, a fleet with its lights off. Orders, far away, grow legs and arrive as men. Grey nights descend wrapped in sanctity, so dense the atmosphere looks like it is cracking to accommodate them. Sisters of silence advance with their quiet pressed out in a convex bowl. The Inquisitor returns in a new hat no one notices, because the rosette she wears chews the horizon. He answers, not with speeches, with engineering. The halo in high anchor has been building for months. Dead satellites, orphaned cargo pods, gang-fabricated kites, mining skiffs that lived 3 lives and deserved a 4th. He has taught the ring to move. It obeys like a pack, tumbling when he wants it to, still when stillness matters. A murmuration of junk that turns into a skin when lances open. The first lance stabs down, a line of white dislike. He does not catch light. That is not his domain. He catches the housings, the gimbals that nurse the beam, the coils that ask the beam politely which way is out. He jostles the question at the moment the beam would become answer. The shot goes through air a street away and drills a cathedral that already had a hole big enough for God. The second lance chooses humility. Guncutters rake the bastion's perimeter. He shook hands with that perimeter yesterday. Today it remembers. Gates that are doors become jaws. Chains climb their own lengths and become fences a man cannot see until he hears his armor scratch them. Skitarii find that their feet have been petitioned by the ground to wait. Shock mauls kiss iron and wake coils hidden in floor tiles. Their charge leaves them all at once and runs harmless and beautiful into a lightning rod hidden in a saint's statue. The rod sings. The saints, you suspect, would approve. The staggered arrival of sacred killers becomes synchronized when the null choir steps forward. The quiet rolls. He tastes it as a prickling in the palms and a narrowing of the world. Fields he can play like a violin turned to rope. He gives up trying to make the air a machine. He makes machines machines. The sisters reach the lip of the bastion, where he has planted levers rather than magnets. Traps that are simple survive theology. A floor plate tips, not much. Just enough that momentum goes on vacation. A set of counterweights decides its job is to be heavy again right now, and drops, dragging a door that closes gently but very firmly in front of the quiet. He cannot move the air around them. He can move the building around the air. The grey knights do not slow. Their faith is mathematics with a soul. Bolter shells that do not answer him still have to pass through space that he has salted with chaff. Their trajectories wobble just enough that carapace plates with names, Anselm, Vespasian, Grace, do not become epitaphs yet. A falchion comes down toward a boy with a notched ear and meets a railing that has been waiting years to be useful. Sparks argue. The blade wins. The boy lives because the railing slowed inevitability just enough for a hospitaler's hand to arrive where it needed to be. She swears at no one in particular and keeps the boy's blood inside him through sheer doctrine. He feels the kulexus before he sees it. A cheapness, a closing of the fist around the good tools inside his head. He sidesteps. Walls lean for him and then stand again, embarrassed at their own eagerness. He refuses to fight an absence with presence. He leads the void down corridors where the floor tiles hide loops of current that are not magnetism, not really, just polite momentum waiting to turn into impolite trip. He bends a hinge with a crowbar, because sometimes a crowbar is the right answer. He has made peace with this. Above, the halo wakes fully. Cargo pods drag fishing nets of chain through altitudes where starfighter intakes do not expect weather. A gunship hits a stream of filings, so fine it might as well be fog, and discovers that its engines cannot ignore friction if friction has an argument lawyered by a man who knows bearings. Macro shells leave their mothers and return home out of filial piety only a little encouraged by an irresistible hand. In the high officer's chapel of a cruiser, a prayer candle gutters when a coil elsewhere hums wrong for 2 seconds and makes the lance crew remember how to hesitate. Inside the bastion, the evacuation becomes choreography. Tokens chime on gates that open in order like lungs. The clinic moves on rails. Tables lock into carts. Drawers snap shut. The wall magnets relinquish instruments reluctantly, and then agree when reminded it is time. The Ogrin carries 3 children and a crate of bread, and refuses to put either down when men with fine armor shout things that should frighten him. Mothers rehearse the drill they did 100 calm nights. Their calm now is ragged, but habits hold. The scribe who once wrote kill lists writes manifests and keeps his hands from shaking by reciting his old catechism backwards, swapping purge for preserve under his breath. He has promised a corridor, not a victory. He concentrates on doors. The yards beyond the bastion have been taking lessons. Gantry cranes kneel, shipyard skeletons link arms, elevator cables unspool into guidelines. The ground here, seeded with ferrous dust washed down from 100 winters, agrees to be traction. He guides columns of people between barrages and pockets of quiet like a man threading a needle in a storm. He can do this because yesterday, and the day before, he drilled this thing until even the children rolled their eyes. Rolling eyes are proof of preparedness. An inquisitorial broadcast tries to cut the air. By the holy will, he clenches. Every voxcaster makes a tiny hiccup and then switches to a prearranged frequency that plays static that sounds suspiciously like rain. The Inquisitor removes her bead and speaks with her mouth. He hears her anyway, because metal loves to carry gossip. Containment failed, she says, very soft, to someone whose answer he does not catch. Initiate, she does not finish. A door in her own ship locks itself for 6 seconds at precisely the wrong moment, because a rogue trader once suffered and paid his debt with schematics. He does ugly things that save lives. He curves a train on a bridge so that it becomes a wall against a fusillade. The bridge complains and then holds, and then, when everyone is past, he lets it rest and it lies down like an old animal. He drags a bank of lockers into a line to block a hallway, and then realizes he has trapped 4 people inside. He lifts the roof 3 fingers' width to let them run. and it takes everything not to keep going, because lifting roofs is a joy. He loves joy. He rations it like medicine. Later, he will remember the lockers bent around a child's drawing of a bird, and he will feel filthy. He files that feeling next to necessary, a folder that gets heavier every hour. The null choir finds a stair that cannot be bullied by levers. He cannot make the iron in the blood of the men guarding it hum, because that would be a surrender by inches to a temptation he forbids himself. He makes the bolts in the banister sweat and then explode outward like a shrug. The banister sags. The sisters step across air as if they were insults to falling. He respects them as one respects truth one hates. He chooses not to meet them. He cannot afford the silence. He sends the Ogrin and 3 others through a service tunnel and tells them to sing very loud and throw the flour sacks when the quiet arrives. Flour is not ferrous. Flour is treachery to vision and footing. For a minute, the world narrows to the ridiculousness of elite killers coughing inside a cloud of bread. He is grateful to bread. The first transport rises from the yard like a promise testing its verbs. It is ugly. A scabbed freighter with borrowed coils and ribs repaired by men who learned to file last month. It climbs anyway. A Valkyrie angles in to cut the ugliness in half with clean weapons. He flicks the auto-purge on a coolant tank aboard the Valkyrie at the exact second when a firing solution is checked by a savant skull. Steam becomes an argument in favor of living. The pilot peels off, swearing by gods he says he doesn't believe in. The freighter reaches a weave of cables in the sky that are not quite a net and not quite a prayer, and finds that the weave's job is to be a hand. The hand guides it through a tunnel of debris that shouldn't be there and is. It vanishes into high anchor, where a rogue trader with a penance to work off smiles like a man who's found a new way to cheat without cheating. He cannot hold the ground. He didn't plan to. He plans to take the meaning. The bastion's walls begin to fold themselves inward, not in surrender, but like a trap closing after the animals have escaped. Cranes exhale. Rails withdraw like tongues. A last gate remains, unlocked, and through it comes a man with a judge's shoulders and the stubbornness of a stone in a river. "You are breaking the law," the marshal says, as if they are discussing a ledger. "So are you," Magneto says, as if they are discussing a ledger. They hold each other's eyes in a corridor where dust hangs like lit mist. "Get your men out of the crossfire," Magneto adds. The marshal's jaw moves. He does. A Grey Knight closes to sword range because he has read history and found that every tyrant believes distance is a shield. The knight's armor is scripture wrapped around muscle, wrapped around a will that could walk through fire without blistering. The blade lifts. Magneto does not try to parry it with iron. He breaks the bolts in the railing to the knight's left. The railing falls. A Hospitaller behind the railing stumbles and would have died. The knight takes the step he wasn't planning to take to catch her, because the math he believes in includes mercy, and the blade misses the boy, because mercy is never wasted. Magneto will not forget the look the knight gives him across that moment, an acknowledgement that an enemy has just written kindness into the proof. He bleeds, not theatrically. He is a man swimming inside a machine, asking the machine to be a sea for him, and the sea extracts its price in salts and sugars and old scars that ache in new vowels. His hands tremble. He funnels the tremble into an arc light that scares off a squad that does not need to be killed to learn politeness. He drinks water that tastes like a pump and a childhood. He doesn't sit. He wants to. He doesn't. The last columns reach the yards. The preacher who shouted sin in front of the gate 2 months ago walks with a girl who has stopped hiding the eye in her forehead. He whispers into the girl's ear. Not sermons, but addresses. Find Sister Amala. She is prickly, but she knows stitches. Find the Ogrin. He will stand where you can see him. Find the rail when you are afraid, and put your token on it, and it will hum, and you will know the world is still here. The girl nods solemnly. The preacher catches Magneto's arm as he passes. If this is blasphemy, he says hoarsely, may God forgive me for approving. Magneto squeezes his wrist and does not pull iron out of his bones, even though he could. He draws nothing but steadiness. He makes the city kiss itself goodbye. Doors that have opened and closed on cue for months in drills now do it for real, one after another, after another. A ripple of closure that moves outward like a benediction. Windows latch, shutters settle, cranes straighten and then bow. The bastion becomes a shape that is not an invitation. Then he takes the filings in the air, the ones that have been his confetti, his storm, his cloak, and lets them fall. The last thing the Inquisitor sees before she gives the order to advance into a place that is now empty of prey is a rain of iron dust that looks like ash. She is too disciplined to hear an elegy in it. Others do. Exodus is not triumph. It is math. He has a window measured in orbits and grudges. The halo opens for the second transport and the third. The fourth is hit by a shell that remembers its job in time. He feels the men inside become numbers he will carry forever. He keeps moving. The corridors in the sky are lanes he has negotiated with Aiel Dari, who do not consider him worth the ink, and with Tau, who will count him a partner until a different spreadsheet says otherwise, and with a rogue trader who understands that reputation is a hinge a man can live on. The first flotilla gathers with the politeness of traffic around a broken bridge, and then, with a shudder that is half joy, half seizure, it leaves. They name themselves in the dark because names are faster than laws. The Polaris Flotilla, a hand suggests, and it sticks not because anyone cares about North, but because the word feels like a thing that points without moving. Tokens become passports. Tokens become keys on ships that have never seen keys. The Ogrin tapes it to his heart. The scribe prints a charter on iron paper with letters shallow enough to be refiled later. No cults, no whips. Food first, children first. Hinges, not doors. The Imperium calls them pirates. The Mechanicus calls them thieves. The Ministorum calls them an abomination. Somewhere a far seer adjusts a skein and sighs because this branch got messier and more alive. Somewhere else, an ethereal draws a new arrow on a map and writes Mutant Protectorate in a margin and underlines it once. The Necrons do not call them anything. They ignore them with perfect courtesy. The Iron Crusade is not a crusade in the sense the Imperium means. There are no banners. There are no edicts that fill a sky. There is a schedule. There are manifests. There is the rumor of doors that open in pogrom nights, and of trains that stall when loaded wrong, and of clamps that care too much about fairness. They move from world to world like a rumor testing a lock. On Gethsemane 9, the governor announces a purge at dusk. At midnight, the cranes bow and the gates forget which way they swing. And by dawn, the purge is a photograph of men looking embarrassed in front of doors that loved other people more, On Calyx, an Arbeits precinct goes on strike because they have learned to like trains that don't derail, and they have been told to help derail one. On Ferrell's Reach, a night engine stumbles because someone at a forge that never admits mistakes has installed a ceramic fastener in the wrong place on purpose, and then put in their resignation the next hour. On 12 nameless rocks, children who thought gravity was a law and cruelty was a weather system find that there are ships where tokens hum and augmetic violins have 25 strings because they can. He fights when he must. He chooses his verbs: rescue, not conquest; delay, not defeat; embarrass, not annihilate. He becomes a migraine in the Empire's temples, a missed line in their poems, a hinge they forgot existed. Inquisitors learn to hate him for the way their orders stall, not shatter. Astartes learn to respect him for the way he refuses to kill when killing would be easier. Chaos learns to leave him for last because he is hard to tempt and harder to convert into an example. Nulls learn that rooms can be traitors to their cause. He learns that he is tired in a way that no sleep answers, and that the only cure for that tired is another child clicking their token against a rail and smiling when it hums. There are losses he counts like coins he will never spend. A woman with mica scales who brought him 3 sons dies because a glancing bolt found a soft place under the law of averages. The boy with the notched ear loses the ear and writes a book about rails anyway. The Hospitaller is captured and returns with a scar that makes a new litanist out of her. The next time she and he meet, they nod without touching because touching would break something they both need to keep. The preacher dies as he wanted to, mid-sentence, in front of a gate that stayed open because he asked it to and because a hinge did its job. The Ogrin loses his laugh for 3 weeks and then finds it behind a crate of bread someone had hidden for hard days. He does not win. He moves the hinge. The Imperium adjusts, slowly, resentfully, the way glaciers learn rivers. Governors who cannot afford embarrassment write amnesties and call them whims. Manufactoria begin to install non-ferrous fasteners badly because a memo that says ceramic only costs more in blood in some districts than it saves in doctrine. A Mechanicus subcult whispers about the hinge theory and is burned out and survives because ideas have escape pods. A rogue trader grows wealthy shipping protected persons under the noses of men who think they own the words protected and person. A craft world sends him a warning 1 hour too late and then sends him a file of a child singing. He saves the file. One day, under a sky not bruised for once, but the flat blue of a world that has not yet been taught to be miserable, he watches a girl with an eye in her forehead, apprentice to a mechanic with an augmetic arm that sings when she laughs. He watches a boy with webbed fingers learn to solder. He watches a council convene without him because he is floating between ships, fixing a coil with his hands. And because the council has learned to be a council, he is relieved. He is not needed every minute. He is needed at scale. He can work at scale. When a child asks him, "Will the Imperium stop hurting us?" he says, "Not today." When another asks, "Will you stop them?" he says, "I will make it expensive." When another asks, "Is that enough?" he says, after a pause long enough to be honest, "It is enough until you are old enough to make a better answer." He sends letters he never sent from the Forge world, rewritten on iron paper with grease on the edges, to the Imperium that could have been. Here are the numbers. Here are the trains. Here are the doors that closed and the ones that did not. Here are the funerals that didn't happen because hinges held. Here is a cost curve you cannot ignore forever. He suspects the letters will never be opened. He writes them anyway, because writing is a field, too, a force exerted on the future. He stands at a viewport as the flotilla slides through a corridor that exists only because a dozen unlikely agreements hold on the same day. Below, a world turns that once tried to kill his people because killing them was habit. Above, a halo of junk glitters in the way of beehives. Around him, metal hums to itself, content, busy, aware. He sets a hand against the frame and feels the filings in the girl's token 3 compartments over buzz back. He could pretend it is victory. He prefers accuracy. Survival is not defeat. Structure is not surrender. A magnet does not save iron. It gathers it. It gives it a direction. It resists dissolution by being itself. He cannot undo an empire. He can teach those the empire calls mistakes how to be an us that empires must calculate for. He can make cruelty misfire. He can carve corridors. He can fix coils. He can make doors love the hands that push them. It is a small thing, weighed against a galaxy. It is everything, weighed against a life. He breathes, takes the weight, and moves the hinge again.